Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are here doing a live Google Hangout with the authors of our Round 8 ELL Chat Book Club book, which is Unlocking English Learners' Potential. We have author Diane Starer-Fenner here and Sydney Snyder, and we're going to talk to them. And we also have Jess Bell joining us. So before we start chatting, I'm just going to have everybody briefly introduce themselves so we know who is who, and then we'll take some time to talk about what we love about the book. My name is Katie Tupple, and I'm one of the co-founders of ELL Book Chat. Yeah, is that my hashtag ELL Chat Book Club? ELL Chat Book Club. We are now in our 8th round. We've been reading books as a kind of changing group ever since last November, I think it was. We've read a variety of books, and it's really amazing how the group has continued to grow. And every time we start a new book, we get new people chiming in, new information and ideas from people, and we just really keep growing. Recently, I guess it was early November, we had a panel of people at the Texas TESOL conference talking about the power of the PLN, and ELL Chat Book Club was something that they talked about as such a great resource for language teachers and classroom teachers, because there are some people who don't necessarily have colleagues in their building who do the same thing. And some of us don't feel like there are colleagues in buildings that have that same passion or excitement. And so we've really collected this amazing group of people who are super passionate about teaching ELLs, and it's really fun to read the same book and share ideas and talk about it. Tan Nguyen is the co-founder of ELL Chat Book Club. Tan lives in Laos, so unfortunately the timing of these chats does not work for him because it's always at a very terrible hour and he has to get up for work. So we miss having his voice on these chats, but he's always chiming in and tweeting, and Tan has such a great knack for creating these amazing pictograms and visuals that really encompass a lot of the information from the texts that we read in a really user-friendly way that teachers can use and gain knowledge from. I'm going to pass it to Diane, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, I'm Diane Starer-Fenner. So Sydney and I are the book's authors, and I'm president of a woman-owned small business called Support Ed. And what we do is we provide professional development and research assistance, programmatic assistance, and curriculum and assessment development, all in support of English learners. So mostly K-12 work, although we've done some work, a little bit of work in adult education as well. And we're based here in the Fairfax, Virginia, Washington, D.C. region. So I'm a former ESOL teacher. I spent most of my time in Fairfax County Public Schools, which is the nation's 10th largest school district. And so I formed Support Ed about 6 years ago under a former name. So we are also growing, just like the book club. So we do work with school districts and in several states, and we're branching out and doing our own online courses as well. So we're really, really thrilled to be to have this book out, and Sydney and I can talk a little bit later about how the book came to be.
Great. Sydney, would you go next?
Sure. My name is Sydney Snyder, and I'm a principal associate at Support Ed. I've been working with Diane for about 6 years, doing all the things she talks about, collaborating with teachers, doing curriculum development, and really thinking of all the ways we can to support our English learners. I'm also a former ESOL teacher. Most recently, I taught in Falls Church, Virginia, and right now I live in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So I'm really excited to be part of the book chat also.
My best friend lives in Falls Church, Virginia.
Oh, really?
All right, Jess, would you go next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jess Bell, and it doesn't matter how many times I record a video, I still literally wave my hand at the camera. I'm really trying to work on that. I recorded a bunch of Screencastify videos for my students, and I literally waved in every one of them. Working on that one. I teach ESL and English 10 at a large urban high school in Indianapolis. We serve 4,000 students in my building. We have over 200 students, levels 1 through 4, and an additional 350 students that are levels 5 and 6, or that have exited our program. So we have a large need in my township, and Indianapolis continues to grow with our immigrant population. So our E&L numbers are just increasing constantly. We're enrolling students all of the time. I have taught grades 6 through 12, English and E&L. So that's what I do. And I'm really excited next year to incorporate a lot more of these strategies as I move to a sheltered class. So I feel like it'll be really beneficial.
Cool. And my role is a K-5 ELD specialist, and previously our district was entirely pull-out, and recently my school has advocated strongly to do more co-teaching. So this year, my instructional responsibilities are entirely co-teaching. And so I particularly appreciate books like this because in the pull-out setting, we do have a curriculum that the district had adopted, which was National Geographic. In my role, I'm collaborating with teachers in a variety of different areas. And so I'm really they're counting on me to bring in those strategies that will get kids talking and will support our English language learners. So I love pulling things from books in order to try new strategies. One of the things I want to talk about with you guys is the ideas for vocabulary, because in my 3rd grade group, that's kind of primarily what I'm focusing on now. And so it's always good to have books. I feel like this book is particularly user-friendly and so chock full of good ideas. Every chapter is like a whole other facet of teaching ELLs that you're like, yes, oh, I need to know about this too. Oh, the next one, oh yes. It's just such a great resource that I know, you read it through for book club, but then it's one of those books that becomes also something that you refer back to and serves as a reference, not just a book that you read once and put aside. So I would love to start by hearing a little bit from our authors about how this book came to fruition. It seems like both of you have experience being ESOL teachers, and I think that when authors have that experience and then kind of foray that experience into a text, it really does become something that teachers can really appreciate because you've been there in the field and you really know how these strategies work in classrooms. So I think that is one of the reasons why it does come across as so user-friendly to teachers. But I'd love to know more about how the two of you started collaborating and kind of how this book came to fruition.
Sure. I guess we might want to start with how we started collaborating. Does that work? What do you think, Sydney?
Sure, sounds good.
So I started, like I mentioned, about 6 years ago when I became an independent consultant, and I got to a point where I was a bit overwhelmed with certain projects, like I had too much on my plate. So I started thinking, what can I do? I need some help. I need somebody who gets it, who can, who's been a classroom teacher, but who also understands research and can kind of synthesize information in very teacher-friendly ways, teacher-accessible ways. So I had done my doctoral work at George Mason University. So I'm like, I'll ask some people at George Mason. And so Sydney answered my call for just some hourly help. And so that kind of grew and grew. And, a couple of kids later after that Sydney had and myself, we're still working together, but in a much more formal capacity. So anything to add there, Sydney?
Yeah, and I think that we started doing a lot more teacher training, and as we were reading the research, we were writing blog posts. Diane had started writing for Coloring Colorado, and then I was able to join some of those. So then really when we were thinking about this book, we thought, we want it to be a synthesis of strategies that we know that are working, either that we've written about, that we've used, that research is telling us support ELLs, and also that we were giving professional development on. So that's really kind of where it came from and how we worked together to start writing it.
Right. And Sydney and I have written so much together that kind of going through the book now, we're like, wait, who wrote that? You or me? Because we work, just so closely together. And she's doing a lot of our own professional development, writing about some of the research, some of the strategies, especially in Coloring Colorado when, Common Core was coming in. And we also did a project with the American Institutes for Research and Diane August to scaffold some curriculum for New York State that's on the Engage New York website. And I kind of hit a certain point where we thought, wow, we've really got enough material here to make it into a book. And, we knew that the readers of Colorín Colorado were really happy with what they were seeing, and people seemed very appreciative of the professional development. So we thought, let's see how this goes and see if we can put this into a book. So we pitched the idea to Corwin, and I had written a couple of other books for Corwin before, so they were very receptive of it, and it became a bestseller not too long ago. So we're happy about that. So some people actually like it. So that's kind of validating.
When I first read this over the summer, when I was on vacation, and I'm pretty sure I read the entire thing in maybe 2 days. It was just, chapter after chapter, because it really is, it's easy to digest and it's a lot of great information. But, there's books that you read that give you information that are tedious. And those are the books that I tend to, read a chapter and a half, and then I can't get through it, and I tend to put it aside for a little bit and then pick it up again and try again and then put it aside. And those are the ones that, even though you're learning, it's because it's just not easy to read and digest. And this book was not like that. I just found that it was really, I love the use of all the tables and charts and the opportunities for teachers to kind of interact with what they've learned in the chapter so that they can apply it. Because, it's one of the things about PD sessions is you get all this information thrown at you, and then you go back to work and you just do your thing in the classroom, and you don't always get a chance to really reflect on what you learn and figure out how you can put these new things into practice with what you already do. And so when there's sections at the end that have you fill out a little checklist or answer questions or think about and reflect on what from that chapter is something that you would use and how you would use it, I think that's really valuable, because that's what makes teachers go from, okay, I learned about that and it's out of my mind, to, okay, this is something that I can really incorporate, and what would it look like? And maybe I'll start with trying this and then go from there. But it kind of takes it from that just in the text to putting it into action.
Great.
Yeah, I also really like the next steps sections. Like that's really, I feel, beneficial to teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Great. That's what we're hoping for. Yeah, we wanted to make sure that we put a structure in place when we wrote the book that allowed for that reflection piece, because, as teachers, as educators, we rarely get a chance to just kind of stop and reflect. What did I just learn? How can I apply that? What am I going to do next? Instead of, you're right, like getting all of these things thrown at you, and you've got to somehow make sense of it all. So I'm glad, it's really good to hear that it was useful to you, and that the structure and all of the tables were useful. I remember somebody wrote on the Twitter chat something like, I kind of knew a lot of this stuff before, but I really like how it was presented and how it's packaged, and that'll be helpful in working with content teachers, because that's our hope, that this gets into the hands of not only, ESOL or ENL teachers, but also the content teachers who might be struggling a little bit and who might really benefit from these strategies.
Yeah, I particularly liked, like I said before, the chapter on vocabulary, because my district is very kind of adopted a district-wide explicit vocabulary routine, and I liked that, because I'm always hesitant when they want everybody doing the same thing. In all classrooms, it will look like this: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So what I liked was seeing some of those things in the text, because that makes me feel like what we're doing really is valid and it's research-based. But I also like that the text takes it so much further. And I think where we struggle is giving students lists of words, and they're memorizing them, and they're based on, we have an adopted reading program, so each week there's 8 words, and those words in the grand scheme of life maybe aren't very important words, but those are the ones that we're meant to teach. And so it really made me think of, what else can I do with these words so that it's not just these words and these definitions, that it's teaching students more about a variety of words. And I love the sentence level and the discourse level, because it's not just about words and definitions. It's about how these words fit into, different disciplines and the way that we talk, and other words that connect to these words. And then, the idea of discourse, because I saw students today doing vocabulary matching definitions, and they were doing it in this really cool digital way, and I loved it. And then I felt like, okay, so what next? Because they're not talking, they're not using these words. And so how do we stretch it to make sure that when we teach new words, they truly become part of students' vocabulary? Because that's the point of vocabulary. So I really, I appreciate kind of all of the different elements that stretched my thinking around developing vocabulary. And I'm looking right now at page 159 with all the suggestions of an interactive word wall, having students talk in pairs, video clips, word experts. And then I highlighted the idea of information gap. That's something that I learned originally from Jeff Swears. And I think that's so important to really help students learn listening in conjunction with sharing responses. Because I feel like very often we say, and I'm totally guilty of this, one of the grade levels I co-teach in is kindergarten, and I often give them their sentence frame and they say it and then the partner says it, but there's no true dialogue. And so I love that idea of the information gap as a way of making sure that students are relying on each other to communicate in a meaningful and purposeful way. Jess, did you have any ahas around vocabulary, since I'm focused more on elementary, but you're focused on high school? So what are your thoughts on vocabulary?
I really did like the vocabulary, all the different categories. I feel like, especially in secondary, there are so many more content classes for our students to take that we really have to be able to support content teachers. So I thought there were a lot of good options and I think that are adaptable to a variety of contexts, because we have classes I had never even considered, and I'm like, oh, I don't really know how to make accommodations for your class, but I can offer you some vocabulary suggestions, because vocabulary is really important for students' language acquisition. But I like when you were just referencing getting them to use them in their actual speech and like authentic conversations, because that was the chapter that really stood out the most to me. Was chapter 4 about academic, like oral language and academic conversation, is really kind of what was my aha part of the book.
Talk about that.
So I am primarily working with intermediate levels right now, and so I'm really kind of helping them format that, how like the academic conversation, because they pick up the social language first, and so but we're in high school and they have to pass biology, they have to take the end of course assessments offered by the state, and they have to be able to pass algebra and English 10 and all of these things, and so they have to learn how to communicate, and it helps them feel more confident advocating for themselves also. So my big push this semester and next semester is really getting them to use more academic conversation and to feel more comfortable with the oral language. One of my all-time favorite things from this book is on page 99. There's a scenario with Mrs. Grove's 8th grade English class. It really inspired me to make bingo for my literature circles.
I have that starred and hearted on my page.
Yeah, like I made a lit circle bingo for my kids, and it's this page, and it has all these different like things that they can talk about, and some are responses and some are conversation starters, and it really inspired me, and they're loving their lit circles, and we're doing it all oral, because I feel like a lot of times in middle school and in high school, like lit circles is a lot of writing. And I wanted everything to be oral. So they just read to each other and they talk to each other. And if they want to make notes, they can, but they use those to talk to each other. I don't collect the notes. Like, it's all very oral fluency based, and they just love it. And they love to read every day. And they're like, I really can't take my book home over the weekend. I'm going to be ahead of your group thing. So it's just, that chapter has been really helpful to me as I really kind of like lovingly and firmly push them into more oral language use.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because in starting the process of co-teaching, it's such a great learning experience, because from the perspective of the language teacher, I'm really learning what day-to-day looks like in grade level classrooms that I have not taught. And really becoming familiar with what they're working on, because in a pullout situation, they're coming to me, I'm teaching something entirely separate, and I'm really not in tune with what the grade level teachers are teaching. I used to do a unit on Arctic animals. Turns out first grade did too, but we weren't collaborating or aligned or anything. So when I'm actually in the classroom, I can see all that's going on. And one thing I always insist is students answering complete sentences. Kindergarten is not too young to speak in a complete sentence. And so when kids want to say, you know, blue or to the park, we're encouraging them. And that was something new for some of the teachers that I'm collaborating with. And they're like, oh, I never thought to ask students to respond in complete sentences. And yet it's like that first kind of building block of elevating the way students talk. And then I do also love kind of all the I've heard them referred to as talk moves, you know, like when you agree and disagree, or you ask clarifying questions, things like that. Teaching students kind of those sample sentence stems or sentence frames is really helpful, because then, and posting them, because then they start to use them in conversations, and it does elevate it. And then teaching them how to engage when conversation stops, and what to say next, or how to re-engage. Those are all really, really important things, and are different from just using sentence frames, because I feel like that's kind of the go-to. Use sentence frames. It helps ELLs. And it does, but a sentence frame or a sentence stem in itself doesn't necessarily help students engage in talking to each other. And that's really, you know, we need to be able to stand back and have them sustain conversation, rather than always us prompting and them responding and then us prompting, you know. So it really teaches them kind of the art of conversation and how to be able to sustain that on their own.
Right, which is a skill that will serve them beyond the classroom walls, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Start to be
absolutely.
comfortable, right? Yeah.
Mhm. We talked a lot. We recently did, with my first graders, they were learning about the Arctic, and we did a series of STEAM challenges. And so I presented them with teamwork talk, and how do teammates talk to each other? And we had that discussion of, is it okay to disagree with your teammate? Because they would all have to create their own individual plan and design for whatever it was that they were going to create. Like they created igloos, and they had to create a blanket to insulate their water to keep it warm. So they would design, and then they had to come together as a team and decide as a team what they were going to do and what materials to get. And that's super challenging. And so we kind of had to support them with how to make sure everyone talks, and how to invite people into the conversation, and how to say, I disagree with your idea because, instead of, no, that's stupid, that's not going to work. Because, you know, that's kind of where students can tend to go, I think, across the spectrum at any grade level, depending on their, you know, experience with collaborating like that. So it was fun to then set them on their own. And since they were doing a challenge, the teachers weren't really helping them too much. So we were getting to listen, and we definitely heard them using some of those, you know, oh, that's a great idea. Or one little girl said, I didn't think of that, but I think we should do that. I think we should use that idea. And so having them, you know, using those academic sentence, you know, kind of concepts in as young as first grade is so exciting, because by the time they get to high school, I mean, if that's built in from the time they're in kinder and first, by the time they get to high school, or they get to a spot where they're going on a job interview or something like that, they're going to be able to represent themselves and converse on such a higher level, which is really, really exciting. Another
important piece that I think that is illustrated by your example is making sure you're giving them something engaging to talk about. Because I think sometimes we're just like, oh, they're, you know, put them in pairs and have them talk. But what are you giving to have them talk about? And we want to make sure like it's something interesting, and they're really going to want to listen and share ideas. Otherwise, it can just be that, here's my idea. Oh, good, we're done, you know, kind of thing. So I like your example, because I think it's something that always good. Just like we want to have engaging things to talk about too, we want to have stimulating questions, so do our students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and have them practice so that I mean, if you think about, you know, adults sitting around the holiday dinner table discussing politics, that gets heated and people disagree. And so how do you be a family member who can disagree but keep a conversation going and be respectful but also interesting? You know, you don't want to be that person that's like, you're wrong and this is why, and your ideas don't matter, but being able to be somebody who can engage meaningfully, but also respectfully, politely, and in a way that makes other people want to talk to them.
Right.
So it's life skills. It's not just classroom skills, but it really is life skills that will help them as they continue in their educational careers. I'm looking ahead to see what else. I remember at one point I had made a connection because our next book is going to be Talk, Read, Talk, Write. And there was one spot where I tweeted out, oh, look, I made a connection to that it was something that it seemed like the Talk, Read, Talk, Write fit so nicely with, I can't find it. I can picture on the page where it was, but it fit so nicely with whatever, maybe it was, oh, it was right here.
It was about vocabulary, wasn't it?
It was about vocabulary, yeah. It's just the point is that teaching vocabulary to ELs may not be as effective as the way that you would teach non-ELs. And so that's something that I feel, we have our vocabulary routine, our instructional routine that we use, and it has its purpose, yet there are other things we need to do to make sure that our ELLs are understanding what we're talking about. And that's realia, visuals, things like that, and adjusting the routine. And I really like that idea of talk, read, talk, write, because you've got that swirl going on that Andrea Honigfeld talks about. You're not just having them listen and look, you're having them read, you're having them write, and you're having them incorporate all of those elements as they're learning new words, which will help them really learn the words more effectively.
And that's one of the things that I find when I share with content teachers in my building, if they've not had a lot of PSYOP training or not a lot of experience with ELs, the idea that I do need them to be able to talk to other students and to the teacher before we can expect them to write and use that language. And you do need to show them pictures and hold things up. They're always like, oh, I'm like, I know you're an expert in your field. But I need you to, student conversation needs to happen too. Our kids need to be able to talk to each other. So I think that I do a monthly newsletter to send out to all my teachers so that if I don't have a chance to work with them directly, I can share tips with them. And I have loved being able to put some of the vocabulary strategies on that newsletter for them with the link to the book so they can, hopefully borrow mine if they don't need to purchase one. I told them they had to wait till book club was over, but we'll see who's going to take it home over break. But it's been a really good resource for me to share with content teachers.
Right, and it's good to hear that the vocabulary piece is really resonating, and it seems like that's with us, with our work with teachers, especially content teachers, that's a good entry point for them to kind of get them interested. They're comfortable probably teaching vocabulary, and then stretching their thinking a little bit with some new ideas. And then our hope is to really push them to start thinking about the sentence and discourse levels of academic language, because those, in our experience, those are the areas where most teachers really need the most support and the most kind of they need to have their awareness built on looking at analyzing sentence and discourse level academic language and building some supports there. It's good always to start with vocabulary, just for that being usually within people's comfort zones, but then once we got them hooked, then moving that out towards the sentence and discourse levels.
And I think that brings up something really important, and something that I don't think I'm the only person to encounter, is kind of a little bit of a divide between the teachers who are the language specialists and the teachers who teach content who just don't, maybe one, they don't have ESOL training, or two, they don't have the confidence or kind of that internal belief that they are truly a language teacher. And sometimes, I don't want to say resistance, but I kind of do, resistance against using some of these strategies. And I mean, to me, it's so apparent that anything you do in the interest of an English language learner will benefit not only English language learners, because they're examples of really good teaching and scaffolds and supports that make instruction just more concrete and more kind of obtainable for students, so that it really, so they can own it, and it's not just this difficult stuff that they don't really get but they're trying to spit back, but they really understand it and can make it their own, and can then teach a classmate about it, or make a video where they're the one showing their expertise on the content that they've learned and things like that.
So ironically, at the high school level, or not really ironically, the content area that my kids really kind of struggle the most with is, unsurprising to you guys, U.S. history. But for a lot of my non-ELL students, like, that's something that they feel very comfortable with, because even if they haven't read all of the U.S. history text as a junior, they have some background knowledge. But that's one of the areas where even my students, standing scholars, just struggle so much because they don't have any cultural background. We had an interesting conversation with one of my students from Vietnam who was like, just the Civil War blew his mind, and he had no idea that slavery had actually existed in the United States, let alone. And so, his U.S. history teacher to understand, like, not just accommodations on time and words and vocabulary, but he needs to, he needs help understanding this whole culture that he's lived for less than a year, and he has no idea about U.S. history. They, don't teach it in Vietnam. So that's one of those things that I feel like are just for teachers, it doesn't even occur to some of them. But then they're starting to kind of like, oh, maybe I should think about that from another perspective. I think that's always good.
Yeah, I was going to mention next that background knowledge, because I started to do that series of PD in 3 videos of trying to give teachers, because there are those of us who want to read a 200 some odd page book for our own PD, like in our own time. And there are many other teachers who it's just that one more thing. Like, there's so much on our plates.
Right.
I need something that is really user friendly. And so my thought process was like, I love to read, so I'll be the one to read these texts, but then how can I synthesize it and present it in a really easy way for teachers to kind of view quickly, and then something that they can really incorporate, that's very tangible, that they can use without having to, read an article or read a document, because that's not everybody's MO. Sure. That's not what every teacher wants to do. And background knowledge was one of the pieces that I thought was really pertinent for teachers who are teaching ELs, because, again, with our scripted reading program, there's a lot of themes that the teachers cycle through that kids don't necessarily have the background knowledge for. And so it's not just instructing in a way that allows them to understand this particular story, but they need kind of that avenue in, or that bridge to get there. Like, what is this all about? And so that's been on my kind of back burner to create. I'm really poor at doing 3 minutes because there's just, there's so much to talk about, but to create a video that really does kind of address the importance of background knowledge. And I had talked about prior knowledge and making sure that you can connect to what students know. But then I also think the idea of teaching background knowledge is so important, just to give students a reference point. Like if they're in the US and they have no concept of US history, teaching about this specific war, like Jess said, there's so much else that they need kind of a summary, or just that starting point to even begin to access that specific content the teacher is talking about. So Diane and Sydney, I'd love to hear from you guys, maybe just some of the main points that you included in your chapter on background knowledge, of what suggestions you would give to teachers about making sure that they kind of begin their unit or their lesson by ensuring that students have that avenue to really approach the content.
Yeah, I think, just kind of thinking about how that chapter came to be, a lot of that came out of our working with New York State and scaffolding this curriculum. So we had a lot of curriculum given to us that had already been written, and English learners were not included in that up front, but it was, kind of an add-on, which it's great that it happened, but that's often the case. We're kind of added on at the end. Well, what are you going to do for your English learners? So it all came about kind of when the people were discussing the concept of close reading. And the curriculum writers we're working with at the time had basically been told that everyone has to read everything cold. Everyone, we have to focus on the close reading. What did the author think? And we were really on the English learner, the ELL people were really kind of pushing back, saying, no, they need some background, but we have to kind of find that sweet spot, right, between giving them everything, taking a few days to just tell them what they're going to be reading and what they're going to be doing. And then by that time, kind of why bother, because you already know everything. And then the other side of that equation is not giving them any information where they're just lost, right? Like your Vietnamese kid who has never heard about the US Civil War, right?
Right.
So, yeah, so just some, big thoughts were all teachers really need to know what background do ELLs have and how are some quick ways we can assess what they already bring with them. And so just the ideas of leveraging what they already know versus teaching them something new. We all have limited time in the classroom, and what can you do that will be the most meaningful for them? Cindy, do you have anything to add to that on the background piece?
I think also the idea that it doesn't have to always be in the class. It could be something small, like a short teacher created text with some, glossary terms, and you send it home as homework, or you pull in home language support if you can find a web page where they could get some background using their home language, if that's possible. And really thinking, I know that can be particularly challenging for classroom teachers. Like, how do I fit this in when everyone doesn't need background knowledge on this topic? And I think that's especially true, like when you're talking about US history, and our kids have been studying US history, since they were in kindergarten. They hear the same ideas over and over. So how, and I think just thinking about how you can be creative to kind of give students that opportunity to get the background that they're going to need for the classroom.
Right, and that's a question we hear sometimes when we're doing professional development. Like, yeah, these strategies are great, but how can we do them? When can we do them? How can we find the time? And usually what we do is just open that question back up to the group, and they have wonderful strategies. Like, if you give people some time and space to think about it, they can brainstorm a list of just really creative ways, like Sydney said, to bring in, for example, the background knowledge piece. If you don't have a whole lot of time in the classroom, or not everybody needs it, just when left to their own devices, we know that teachers really have these wonderful ideas, and if we give them some space to collaborate, they can come out, these ideas can come to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's two important avenues too with background knowledge. That one, like when we read Carol Salva's book, Boosting Achievement, about SIFE students, those students come with such unique backgrounds and histories and stories that sometimes their perspective and their background contributes something unique and different. I remember Carol mentioned one student who had lived near an active volcano. And so when they were talking about volcanoes or something related, that student brings knowledge that is so pertinent to the lesson. And that was their lived experience. Like, that's so great. But then the other avenue is really helping students to see connections between what they've already learned and kind of that new topic. Like with our reading program, we cycle through a topic a week. And so you kind of have to make this thread so students understand, where are we coming from and where are we going? Because, 1 week it was inventions, and we're learning about Thomas Edison. And then the next week it's inventions that contribute to athletes performing better. And then now it's about agriculture. And even for me, I have to sit and think, how do these things tie together? And so kind of addressing that and having students understand and make connections just helps them to kind of contextually think about the world and how all of these things kind of fit, or else it is just kind of random and discrete. And that's what we don't want for students, is for them to think, well, what I'm learning about right now is going to have nothing to do with what we're talking about in 2 weeks. So we need to kind of facilitate those, and not just tell them how it fits, but facilitate them thinking and realizing how all these things fit together so they can have a better understanding.
And I think what you were going to say, that piece about having a teacher spend a little time reflecting on what experience my English learners have had that they can connect to this, mm-hmm. even if it's not prior studies or prior unit of study, but in their own life. And how could they make connections? So, for example, Civil War, what have they experienced in their own life that connected to politics in their own country that they could draw on?
And that's something that we're not going to necessarily know to say, oh, you tell us about this. That you have to give them that time and the kind of the avenue and the freedom to make those connections, because that's one where we can learn a lot about our students, but that's where they can insert that knowledge that they have that we don't necessarily know that they have, because
Right.
you don't, you can't be an expert on every culture and every student's history. They're the ones that really bring that voice. So we have to open the door to that voice, I think. One, I was thinking of ways to kind of make this, I don't know, not relevant, but kind of put it in words that teachers would connect with. And I was telling my husband, I said, it reminds me of how every time we go and see a superhero movie that you like, you need to kind of explain what realm are we in and who the characters are, because I don't know. I go along to be nice, but it's not my interest. And so I don't truly get it. There's all these different Justice League versus, just he needs to kind of fill me in. And he's like, yeah, that's a bad idea. Your teachers aren't going to connect to that. Like, how many of them are going to really connect with comic books and superheroes? He's like, what is it that they would know a lot about? And I said, I don't know, like The Bachelor. I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that. Like when he sits down to watch The Bachelor with me, I have to say, okay, here, this is him. These are all the people. These are the ones that are still in it. Or This Is Us. That's one of the shows that my staff really likes. And when my husband started to watch it, I had to give him the lowdown of, okay, these are the characters, and they were triplets, but they're not anymore. And this one was adopted, and just gives you, that's kind of like that idea of background knowledge. He would have no idea what was going on if I didn't just give him that little synopsis to say, okay, here's your entry point. Now watch it with me and don't ask me a million questions. Just be on the same page with me. But I thought maybe I would use one of those in a PD&3 to help teachers understand that, you need to give students that entry point so that they can be on that same page and learn with everybody else. And they're not constantly just feeling like they don't have that grounding of the work that you're trying to do together.
And can you tell us more about what a PD&3 is?
My goal was to make a series of videos that were 3 minutes or less, but I talk way too much. So I can kind of hit 5, but 3 is very hard. But just so that my idea was to do it for my staff as a way to say, hey, learning, helping students build background knowledge is really important. So here's a brief 3 minutes on some strategies that you might use, or why this is relevant, or why you need to do this for ELLs. And then another one that I did was on actually the QSSSA strategy that I learned about in Texas. And I added a little something to it, but that's a great kind of questioning strategy that includes elements that are really important for ELLs. And so just a 3 minutes to kind of explain the strategy and then what I added to it and how to use it, so that something that a teacher could watch that 3-minute video, and it's of me talking and I try to do visuals, but so that then they could really implement it. Because we get a lot of, my principal will include an article in his weekly information for us that's meant to give us little tidbits to include. And I have a hard time reading that. And I mean, I love to read books, but I often find myself skipping that. So I feel like it needs to be something really quick and easy, but meaningful for teachers. And that would make it more likely that they would start incorporating some of these strategies and really focusing on what ELLs need in classrooms, because we don't get a lot of PD that's focused on ELLs. And I feel like I said before, anything that's focused on ELLs is going to benefit more than just your ELLs. So it seems like the more we provide PD around what ELLs need and what benefits ELLs, the better we'll be. But it needs to be in a way that is user-friendly for the busy teacher who doesn't have the time or the desire to read the whole book, but would benefit from all of the gems and great information that's in a book like this.
Great, thanks. No, I didn't know if that was a thing, PD&3, or if this is your term, but I love it.
It was kind of, the PD&3 sounded like a good rhyming hashtag, but it's really hard to put it into that short of a time. But that's my goal, is to get just a variety. And then many people on Twitter chimed in, oh, hey, I could do the one on background knowledge, or I could do the one on this one. So I think it would be really great to get a variety of people creating these videos, because what I think many of us have realized is sometimes it's hard. It's hardest to give information like that to your staff. And so like I brought in Valentina's video on comprehensible input, and hers was less than 3 minutes. And it's such an amazing video on comprehensible input where she speaks in Serbian with no visuals or no, fast speech. And you realize how difficult it is for ELLs to be in a classroom where they really don't know what the teacher's saying, versus when she started holding up realia and gesturing and slowing down her speech, even though you didn't know what she was saying in Serbian, you knew what she was saying.
Yeah.
And so I shared that because I figure, just bringing in that different person, but if we could collaborate and get a variety of people making a variety of videos, it's nice to be able to share with our different staffs, because sometimes it is hard to hear it from your own neighbor,
Yeah.
or your own colleague, but to bring in somebody else who has this idea, then it becomes a little bit more powerful, I think. So maybe that'll be a long-term project, but that's the hope.
Let us know. We'd be happy to help out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jess, did you have any other big takeaways from this book?
There are a lot of takeaways from this book. So I have been using Screencastify, and I've got some plans in my little noggin there to make some videos for my staff. And I think that's going to be my suggestion for PD and 3 is just make your slides with your framework and don't deviate. Because I'm a talker too, and I know if I have to have a time limit, it has to be well thought out and laid out. But yeah, I think it's very approachable for content area teachers, and that's what I have been so appreciative of, is because I just have to be able to share things that are approachable and easy for them to understand. And I feel like this book is both of those things. It's very approachable and it's very easy to understand, even if you don't have a background in second language acquisition.
Mm-hmm. But it does also provide that research, because if you have a teacher that questions, well, why are you telling me to do this?
Yeah.
This gives you a complete research base to say, well, this is why, because, this is why it's good for ELLs, or this is, these are other resources of people who have done work in this and who have watched students and evaluated how this has worked for them. So it's not just do this, it's do this and here's why, which is really great, because a lot of teachers want to know that. They don't want to just dive into something because a colleague told them to. They want to know why and kind of, what's the outcome going to be? Because as we said, every moment that we invest in a certain strategy is time out of our day. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck and that we're using our time really wisely, because we don't have a lot of it. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts from our authors?
Just for me personally, I was just so thrilled. I've been on Twitter for a while, and I've heard about the book club chat or chat book club. And just when you contacted me and said, hey, you're in the running, it was so exciting. So it's just been so fun, like getting to know people through the chat and then meeting some of them in person. Like I just met somebody last week in Long Island who, she had me sign her book and all of that. It was great. And it's wonderful then to see people from Twitter, like in real life and, at conferences and various other events. So it's just been a great community in a way, that I've discovered for people who can't get to professional development for whatever reason. You can't get a sub, you can't get funding. It's just too hard to get to. You have other family commitments. What a wonderful, basically free way to connect with other people who are interested in the same topic. So thanks so much for including us. And I hope to join the next book club chat as a reader.
Great. So we're so thankful that we've had this great run of having authors who are so willing to participate. And I think often, Carol says a lot, fangirling, that's how we feel about authors who write about our craft. It's like, I don't know, you are real people, but yet we just kind of put authors on such a pedestal that we can learn so much and you have this expertise, but it's really a really unique experience when we kind of do realize that authors are real people and they're willing to sit down. And you guys are taking time out of your day to have this chat. It's it's really a unique form of professional development where you read a book and then you can have a chance to tweet the author and say, what did you mean by this? Or this was a great idea, or I tried this out. And I feel like there's a kind of a mutual benefit to it, because I'm sure that as authors, when you witness people trying out the things you've written about and coming back with the feedback of that helped my students, that's got to be really rewarding. And it's super rewarding for the readers as well to be able to feel like we have access to, your expertise and your experience. So thank you for participating. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been just so cool to hear from teachers about, like what's been beneficial for them, or even, a couple of weekends ago, I think it was like over Thanksgiving, a couple people were having difficulty interpreting one of the figures, and I was like, no, it means, this, but just having that feedback, like, whoa, we really need to think about, maybe if there's a next version or next edition, we might want to rework something. Just having, that wonderful feedback that we love giving to each other as teachers and as educators. It's been, just super helpful.
Yeah. And I think that we're officially, the chat goes until next weekend. So last week and this week are chapters 8 and 9. But then the nice thing is, all of the tweets with the hashtag are archived and people can continue the chat. And we're always finding that as we move into the next book, there are always connections back to books that we've already read. So I'm sure that this will come up again in future chats as, oh yeah, remember in Unlocking Learner's Potentials, we read that, and seeing those connections. And hopefully our ELL Chat Book Club will be, an entity that stays alive, because it really is. I feel that it is my best professional development to read and talk to other teachers about what, their take on it and what they've tried. And it seems like it's becoming an even larger community, but it's just such a great group of people and so much knowledge. And they say the smartest person in the room is the room. That just keeps on coming up for me in ELL Chat Book Club, because there are so many different kind of nuances of expertise with the authors and people teaching in different settings. Tan is international and Carol teaches refugees, and there's just so many different roles, and it continues to be such a great learning experience for, I think, everybody involved. So I hope it stays strong.
Well, thanks for starting it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, thank you for joining us, and I will tweet out the link to this so that other people can view it, and then we'll let people chime in afterwards about what we talked about.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.